Now, flooding in KZN and even the Eastern Cape is increasingly becoming a recurring phenomenon. Owing to climate change, it's to be expected that hazardous weather will increase risk to life and property. Volker von Widdern, Principal of Strategic Risk at risk consultancy Riskonet Afrika, says risk modeling for these events is based on outdated data that needs urgent re-evaluation. He joins us now to elaborate. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. You speak about outdated information that needs an urgent update. What exactly are you referring to as we continue more and more? In fact, just 2 weeks ago, we saw the impact of climate change again in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yes, and good afternoon to your viewers. The data issue is that our buildings have been constructed over, let's say, 100, but at least the last 50 to 30 years. And they were built quite correctly or reasonably under building codes that were relevant at the time. We had a 100-year floodline that was relevant at the time. And if you look at how climate change is escalating, but escalating at an increasing rate of escalation as well, what's happening is that a roof design that would have been appropriate perhaps 50 or 30 years ago for runoff, for hail loads, for wind loads and things like that may no longer be appropriate now. So you could have a huge warehouse where you now have a massive hailstorm and the hail just collects on the roof and it just becomes too heavy and it falls through the roof and destroys a lot of the goods inside. Then there's water damage from rain thereafter. And the same happens with wind and accumulated water, stormwater runoff and the like. And so the current assets that we have haven't been modeled and measured according to current weather conditions because they were built, as I say, several decades ago.
So how should we now define flood risks? I mean, that in itself comes with several other components.
Yes, so floods, well, people think about them in terms of rivers, but we have enormous levels of runoff of water when a significant downpour hits a city area or maybe an industrial site and so forth. So what's happening is that you have water accumulations that happen and wash away areas that are meant to be able to retain this water. And there's another element of flood which is called rising water, where you may have a river or a dam area that just flows and overflows into neighboring areas that were never actually planned or designed as flood. So you have water encroaching over much larger areas than people thought of before. And so when you're looking at a flood risk now, it needs to be many more other factors that to be taken account of, including perhaps bursts of dam walls or other kinds of breaches of the water flows further upstream that have knock-on effects downstream.
So as the effects of climate change worsen, how important will it then be for insurers and clients to now have a different sort of commitment when it comes to assessments and special risk exposure? What sort of information will be needed in that regard to have a broader approach?
Well, that point about special risks is very important because it is a section of the policy that used to be taken for granted. That would be flood, storm and earthquake, for example. However, because of the volatility of the weather, and in some cases certain earthquake risks, those special risks are now being limited in terms of what the insurers are willing to underwrite as a share of your risk. So let's say we have a factory that's worth 100 million and those special risks are included. Many insurers are now looking at that and saying, yes, you can insure the factory for 100 million for fire, but we'll only give you 20%, 20 million, for special risks, which could be hail, wind, and other factors. So then you have to buy more cover or separate cover for that. And they're generally limiting this. So then the clients then should look at that and say, okay, how could we give better information to our insurers to show that we may be less exposed to special risks than we are in general? So that point about doing a special risks assessment separately to a fire risk assessment is now very important. And these general exclusions or general limitations in policies are something that corporates and property owners should be very careful about.
So what advice would you give for those who may be seeking insurance and trying to find out if they've chosen the right insurance and ask the correct questions for adequate cover?
Well, that's where data modeling and understanding climate is very important. And that could be done in a collaborative way as well. So let's say I was, again, the owner of this 100 million factory. It would seem onerous on me to go and spend significant sums on myself. But we could go to an office park, we could go to an environment close by and say, guys and ladies, let's all club in and do some weather modeling for our particular site. And that means taking the known data and escalating it for the trends of climate change, looking at water runoff, looking at storm areas, looking at how high or low we are relative to surrounding areas, and putting a deal together that can really show that under extreme circumstances, a particular property address still will survive those kind of storms. At the moment, that is not being done, and because the insurers don't have the data, they are limiting their exposures.
Yeah, very well. Thank you so much for that discussion. That's where we leave it for now with Volker van Widdern, who's the Principal of Strategic Risk at risk consultancy Riskonet Afrika.